Right, so yeah, welcome everyone. As I say, very special edition of Agile Expertise, it being our first product week event. So yeah, really excited to kind of get that going. And obviously, thanks very much for coming along. I think it's going to be quite an intimate group. Oh, we've got another person just joining now, so that's nice. And yeah, I guess just some housekeeping just before we get going, and I hand over to Aaron. We will have a Q&A after he's done his talk. I think as per usual, it works well if we, rather than sort of asking questions throughout, we just pop the questions into the chat. So if you have a question to ask midway through, then just put a little Q and then ask your question. So write the question, put a Q in front of it, and then I will ask Aaron the questions at the end. Can go through those. As always, I think they haven't been able to make it this time. I think they'll probably join the other ones later in the week. But Satal and Giles, I just want to say thank you to them. I'm sure they'll be watching back at some point, and obviously Agile World just for their support to Xpertise recruitment, and they're helping get these events up and running. So yeah, without further ado, I will pass the control over to Aaron for his talk on nurturing ideas and developing concepts. Just give you the control now. There we go.
Brilliant. Let me grab that. So I'm just going to go into present mode on this. And so greetings all. So this is, I described this as a kind of call to action rather than a presentation, and it's really sharing ideas. So I've been working in product since, to be honest, I think I've been working in product for about 25 years, although it wasn't called that then. And so over periods of time, I've put together different ideas, and in particular, the thing that I most crave is the ability to actually get in front and actually have time to think up front and actually allow us as product people to really do our job, which is actually to look at problems and actually think about them holistically and think about them ahead. And I just don't think it's rare, and I'm delighted for any of you who really do have that, but I can tell you in so many positions that I've had, I've rarely had that. So I came up with some ideas for some ways that it could be instituted, and so that's what I want to share. Now, my operating mantra, I was going to say operating, I won't go there. My operating mantra has been for a number of years is make things brilliant, make brilliant things. It's how I like to work. I like to try and create a culture where collaboration and innovation can take place. And it takes a hell of a lot of energy to do that. Any of you who share my thoughts on that will probably agree that it's not an easy thing to do, but it's well worth it. So I was originally asked to come up with something on this topic some months back, and I had been working on it. So this was a great opportunity, and this really, the reason I'm giving you a slightly long preamble here is what I want is a dialogue, because this is a work in progress and different organizations will find different ways to make this work. So this is just my kind of proof of concept, if you like, or my MVP to get us started. And so, as I say, this, I'm calling this, it's a call to action. I call it Aaron's 5-step plan to kickstart innovation, or we'll just call it Aaron's 5-step plan for short. As I say, I've honed the ideas within the presentation over a number of years, but it's the first time I've been able to distill them into an actionable plan. So here's my opening gambit for you. And this I truly believe, which is we know as businesses that if we stand still, if we fail to innovate and evolve, it won't be long before we're history. Now, I will tell you that's probably the only slide that I will read, but I think because it's one of my pet hates about presentations, but I thought it was well worth reiterating that. Now, as we're not together in one room, I can't really see what your reaction is to that statement, but I'm hoping that you broadly agree with it. And here's the thing, you know, if you accept that statement as fact, then it's incumbent upon each and all of you, and I'm talking about anyone with power, to do the following. You have to invest in your future. If any of you are wondering what the ×3 next to communicate is about, that's shorthand for communicate with your customers, make sure you're communicating and not instructing or telling them, and make sure that you're the ones doing the listening. Your customers can't predict what a successful product strategy looks like, but if you aren't engaging with them and you're not learning to hear and identify their underlying needs, then neither can you. So this plan of mine is one that I believe will cost little, but if you execute it well, it will give you not only a clear return on your investment, but it can actually make companies understand the purpose of innovation. It will also lead to having a more engaged workforce, people who feel empowered and enabled. Now, I wish this was a completely original concept of mine, but this goes back to a concept that's known as, I'll introduce it. It's a concept called Kaizen, which you may well have encountered. Now, holding off on any groans or sighs, you may already know this concept by other names, but let's start with what it means. To the right of the slide are kanji characters, kanji being the adopted logographic Chinese characters that are used in the Japanese writing system. Kai, the character above, means change, and Zen, the character below, means good or better. So change for the better, or as it is often implemented, continuous improvement. Now, let me repeat the concept though. Kaizen refers to business activities that continuously improve all functions and most essentially involve all employees. And by all employees, I mean everyone from the CEO to an intern who is here for 6 weeks. And let me be clear, what's essential here isn't some kind of line dancing formation with the whole company involved. That could be fun or amusing. But what's important is that everyone is invested in the concept and engaged with the principles. As to why all employees, well, let me give you a few concrete examples, if I don't get lost in my own notes, of how good ideas can come from anywhere in the company. When I started out on my digital career, I joined CNN Financial News, CNNFN.com as it was known. It was a New York-based TV station with a global financial website. I was the webmaster for CNNFN.com, and I was embedded with the financial journalists, and I observed firsthand how they interacted with the CMS or content management system and tools that we built for them to do the job. The CMS was built in-house, Perl, MySQL, JavaScript, and all of the techies involved, actually many of us contributed to, we were encouraged to contribute to its development. What's amazing for me, what was amazing about that experience for me is it's pretty rare that you get to observe your customers using the tools that you build. But by doing so, I was able to affect small continuous improvements that save time by smoothing out some of the bumps that I saw them encounter, and by providing useful shortcuts, and generally made their lives easier. And that's example one. For example two, after hiring my first members of staff, I noted that onboarding staff required me to contact multiple departments to get a security pass, a desktop setup, a laptop ordered, HR processes, blah, 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 blah. I just read Bill Gates' book back then, Business at the Speed of Thought, which I thought was actually very good and very smart. And it occurred to me that a web-based approach to this would allow users like me to fill in one form with all of the things that might be required for your new employee and press submit. The resulting form would then be sent to each department, triggering auto responses to the submitter to let them know that the departments had received the request, and an email address should they need to follow up. Genius, I thought. I'm not sure my ideas were shared in that sense. My genius definitely wasn't seen quite that early on. I put the ideas together, I shared them. HR smiled, though I'm not sure that wasn't a snarl. They just couldn't wait for me to get out the bleeding room. I mean, they were kind of like, oh God, what do we need this for? So they weren't open to ideas. They were absolutely not interested in thinking differently about what they did. Not many of them are there anymore. And the companies had no mechanism to invite suggestions like that. So I went nowhere. But as you know, it's a thing about when you're taking part in something, you suddenly see areas. And so it's really important to give people an opportunity to do that. My last example was as I was known as a bit of a linguist in the London office. I speak, not that well, but I speak fluent French and speak Italian and German. But I'd get the odd request to help out. And on this particular day, someone walked up to my desk and asked if I could run an interview with the Italian Minister of Finance. And I said, no. I said, my Italian extends to conducting orchestras, which was actually my first career. I can cook in Italian. I can bitch in Italian about how the train is, but talking to the Italian finance minister, not so good. So luckily I recommended a native Italian speaker, but I held on to the thought. And when I built the team's CNN's intranet site, I crafted a search tool, which was dead easy, but it allowed me to ask every single person to input their detail, whether they spoke another language, and if they did, whether they were native speakers, highly proficient, or had a good working knowledge, i.e. able to order takeaway. And my point was that actually it's just that element of when you're working on something at some level in a company, you have an insight into what's happening that is very valuable. And so whether you have the CEO, CFO, or someone working in the post room, they will see things and efficiencies that can make a huge difference to your company. So I hope that the above demonstrates that, as I say, we're all capable of imagining better ways of doing things. But if you don't involve everybody, then you lose the ability to improve many, often quite small processes, and they could be cost efficiencies that can be very effective. Now, I mentioned that you might already be familiar with the Kaizen concept by other names. Now, a hackathon or hack event, whether it's a single day or a 2-week event, is an example of Kaizen. But I'm going to tell you, from my point of view, I believe it's one that's rarely executed well. If any of you have a regulated and well-organized program of hack events, good for you. But I just hope they're not regarded by the rest of the company as engineering or techie events, because if that's the case, then your events are not being seen as generating true value and are almost not getting the investment and attention that they need. I've worked in a great many companies, and in general, I think that internally run hack days rarely deliver. I've been in places where they've delivered some amazing tools, but that's the rarity. It's not actually the norm. And the problem in many places I've worked is they're often perceived as something we do at worst to let our engineers let off steam, or at best to let them experiment with the ideas that they've had. The events are rarely, if ever, open to freelancers and contractors. And if that's the case where you work them, you may be having hack days, but they're not Kaizen events. And why not? Because first and foremost, this should be about challenge, communication, and collaboration. And if you're going to collaborate, then everybody needs to be involved. This one's also very well known. Many of you may have heard about Google's 20% time. It was one of Google's most famous management philosophies. Back when they highlighted their IPO back in 2004, Larry and Sergey wrote into the IPO letter this following statement, which was, "We encourage our employees, in addition to their regular projects, to spend 20% of their working time on what they think will most benefit Google. This empowers them to be more creative and innovative, and many of our significant advances have happened in this manner." Sorry, I have to admit so. So just to go back to that, so 3 of those significant advances that wouldn't have happened without 20% time: Google News, Gmail, and AdSense. That's pretty bloody significant. I mean, those are like staggeringly kind of important things that wouldn't have happened. So there has been a lot of debate around whether or not 20% time exists anymore at Google. A few years ago, I read in a couple of places that it was as good as dead because it became too difficult. It's complete nonsense, because actually 20% time was never really aimed at everybody all the time. The idea of it is actually, it's much more nuanced. I've talked to someone a couple of weeks ago in London who was saying, oh, it's still very much alive, but as I had guessed, the use and allocation is much more nuanced. And basically the point, when I show you my idea to adopt, you'll see why it's more nuanced than that, because ultimately the time is there for people who have the ideas that they want to develop. Not everyone's going to have an idea in every quarter that they want to develop, but it's there for when you want it. And one thing that does make this Kaizen and distinguishes it from internal hack days is the purpose that Larry and Sergi stated. Now, I've abstracted it so that you can adopt it for yourselves. If my, oh, something's not going right here. Okay, so sorry, I've just got to find my notes. Oops, snafu here. Okay, so here's the goal as I'm setting it out. This isn't for the greater glory of technology or even humanity, though I will be honest, that's a very lofty goal. This is about doing things that will benefit your company. So before I go on to Erin's 5-step plan, let's take a little detour. And the reason for the detour is it paves the way for making my plan work. So you might ask, who's the guy? So this guy is called Phil Kent. I worked with him at Turner Broadcasting. He was the president. He was responsible for the TBS portfolio. Now, these are businesses that many of you will be familiar with, including both CNN, US and international, Headline News, CNN.com, TBS, TNT, Turner Classic Movies, Cartoon Network, Adult Swim, and Turner Sports. Globally, TBS operates more than 130 channels in some 30 languages and in more than 200 countries. Phil had a distinguished career at TBS, and that final quotation that I put on the slide completely sums him up as a leader who is keenly self-aware. I'm citing Phil, though, because he also cared about staff engagement and retention. And in his early days as president, Phil commissioned a piece of work on productivity across the networks and across the globe. And there's this wonderful little bit of it that I just fell in love with when I first learned about it. It turns out that pretty much wherever you are in the Western world, the award for the least productive 4 hours of the working week go to, that's right, as Dr. Evil might say, it's frickin' Friday, people, and right after lunch. Oh, and guess what? Those 4 hours are even less productive in spring and summer. So back to Phil. You remember Phil? Well, he elected to use that piece of information as a retention tool. Between Memorial Day at the end of May and Labor Day at the beginning of September, he gave each employee the last 2.5 hours back of every Friday back to go spend time with their friends, families, or whatever they wanted to do down the pub. It focused their minds for the last 90 minutes of those days, and it made them feel really good about their company. It equates to roughly 4 days extra vacation, but at a criminally low cost. I thought it was a very smart move, and having checked with a pal this week, it's a policy that's very much alive almost 20 years on. So listen, if you decide to, or if your CEO decides to borrow Phil's idea and implement something like it next year, go for it. It's a great retention tool. It will make your employees feel appreciated. But wait, that's not until June. So what about now? Well, here's my pitch to you. And as a true product leader, I don't ask you to trust me. I ask you to test this out, kick the tires, and see if it bears fruit. And as you can see, I suggest you start with 10% time and use those least productive 4 hours of the week. Because if you can negotiate with the C-level team to make them see the value of giving up time that's poorly spent to actually invest in people and invest in efficiencies, and it produces a return on investment, they will then consider expanding it. But it gives you a chance to do it in a period that it's not productive. And here's the thing I say to each of you who is here. If you do something like this, you must measure and verify that it delivers value and get everybody involved, because, as I say, great ideas can come from anywhere. So before I outline the plan, there's one more step. And as an ex-developer, there had to be a step 0. This is important because before you can execute the plan, it needs to be well designed and communicated. Clearly state what you're putting in place and outline the headline goal. You need to identify a gang of 4 who own and share the process. This shouldn't stop them from participating. You could also rotate people in and out of these positions each quarter. The C-level exec should be your judging panel or dragon's den. You need to communicate the schedule and outline what you expect of people at each stage. And we'll cover those next. But the key here is you have to have that C-level buy-in, because if you don't, you won't get the enthusiasm and the commitment that you need to make this work. So here we go. Step 1. So this is a first session, and it's all about spending time in people's heads and capturing ideas. Now, some people will have started, the minute you announce this, you will have people, the kind of really annoying ones like me, who will immediately be thinking about this and putting ideas down. Most of them probably absolute crap, it's fine. There are no such thing as bad ideas at the start. So some will want to work alone. Others may have somebody that they really work well with and they enjoy bouncing ideas off. But listen, if it gets beyond 2 people, there's a problem, because actually it gets out of balance and it gets argumentative. So for those people who don't have an idea up front, and here we're going back to what I was talking about, the nuance of 20% time. And let's be honest, for those people who don't have an idea up front, and that's likely to be most of the company, brilliant, because their time will come later. For now, they should get back to work and business as usual. It's only those people at this stage who have ideas that need to go and work on them. As I say, great ideas can come from anywhere, but the important thing about the people who come later is that great products and initiatives will require teamwork, and that comes a little later. Step 2 is the pitch. Now, it's really important, that this second session is a safe environment, i.e. there is no such thing as a stupid idea, and all ideas must be listened to. Now, if you're having someone who's pitching an idea and they haven't really grasped and they need more help, this is where you encourage them at this point to actually talk about what it is they want to do and pitch for that help. But here's what this is about. When you make your pitch, you need to attract 3 people to come to you and work with you on this pitch. The idea is they need to come from different parts of the business, because this is about collaboration, building relationships and gaining a better understanding of your company in the process. So ultimately, this is where you end up with a team of 4 people, and basically I'd expect it to be something in the level of whoever pitches the idea, a business representative, product UX or design representative, an engineer, marketeer. It could be somebody, it doesn't matter, but it needs to be a mix. They can't all be engineers, they can't all be product people, and the reason for that's coming. The key is to establish that this isn't about working with your mates. And here's something that I learned the hard way, which is that you might think that's where your best work comes from, but it never does. Great teams are groups of people that challenge each other. And you also need a diverse team, because in a few weeks, you're going to come back and present a fully fleshed out plan. So before we go into step 3, if there are any remaining pitches, because if you remember in step 2, we allowed people to say they need help flushing out the pitch. So if there are any, then this is the time they need to make that pitch. Now, any team members who've already committed to a plan, they don't need to attend this. They already have work to do and they should be getting on with that. The rules are, as before, the pitcher needs to attract 3 diverse team members to the idea. Any ideas that do not attract participants by now need to either end or go back to the drawing board. For the rest of this session, and for sessions 4 to 8, it's time to draw up the plans. Now, some plans might come together in a couple of weeks, but others may need the full 6 weeks. As your teams know more, they should communicate how long they will need so that the Gang of 4 organizers can program the events that follow. At any time during sessions 3 to 8, if a team realizes that it needs additional input, again, it should approach the Gang of 4 and ask for that help. And if any team completes early, that's brilliant. They should review their work here and there, and they should get back to business as usual. Step 4, presentations. So these 3 sessions are here for teams to present their detailed plans. Now, I want you to think Dragon's Den here. And for that reason, I recommend that teams prepare and practice their presentations. Because you're up against, the leaders of the company, and they're going to ask tough questions. So this is why you need a diverse team to dig in and get those. How you present is completely up to you as a team, but all team members should be present for questions, because they will have certain details and specialities that they will come to the fore in questions. And each session shouldn't last more than 2 hours, because both the judges and audience can retire and consider which ideas inspire them most. And actually going into this stuff in great detail can be exhausting. And you'll love this, but of course I refer to this in my notes as Judgment Day. Nothing like a bit of drama. So in session 11, it's time for the judging panel to announce which ideas they'd like to see move forward. Now, the panel need to articulate their reasoning for the benefit of everybody listening, and this should be a town hall for the entire company, because we want people at this first one to be inspired. And there will be some people who have had ideas the first time around who are too nervous to present them, but when they start to see this thing work, the momentum builds. And so the panel should articulate the reason why they're thinking about things. Obviously, they could decide if they want to take any particular idea and take it straight into major development. That's up to them. Of course, they can do that. They should also discuss whether any of the ideas need more work, because there might be an idea that they can see has legs, but they think it needs more work. But if they do that, then the idea the Gang of 4 should have is to propose one of them is a sponsor or mentor to assist that team. Because remember, the whole idea here is everybody is taking part in this. That's what makes it work. And of course, there must be an audience pick, because this is I'm not saying your companies are necessarily democratic, but there needs to be a bit of a democratic process here. And sometimes I will be blunt and say the audience will sometimes see something that C-levels are not going to see. So if the pick is different to what's already selected, it should obviously go into 10% time. And we're almost at the end of the first cycle. Of course, in true Agile session style, session 12 will be a retro, because of course, as I said to you right at the outset, this is just my way of actually doing this. Different people will find different ways to make this work, but the only thing that will ultimately make it work is if at the end that you have a retro, so you can see what went well and what needs to change before you repeat the process next quarter. And it's up to you to assign the metrics for success and to assess any benefits that accrue. So quick recap from me. is. So before we get started, we outline the plan, communicate the headline goal, appoint a gang of 4 to run the program, and choose the judging panel. Step 1 is to capture ideas. Step 2 is to pitch those ideas and inspire 3 people to join you. Step 3 is to draw up detailed plans. And step 4 is to present those plans to the company and the judges. Step 5 is for the company and the panel to judge the presentation and announce what's going forward. We then hold a retro to look at what we've done this quarter, see what went well, and decide if anything needs to change before you repeat the process. You may decide to hold additional events to discuss progress of the ideas. It's vital to report back on the success and failure of ideas. And remember, the failures is in many ways even more important. The successful ones are going to be seen, but understanding why things fail allows us to get better. Ultimately, if you can derive real benefit from a program like this, you can choose to extend it and move to 20% time. You'll see that only part of your workforce is engaged with 10 or 20% time. And remember, this isn't some kind of reward for good behavior. These people are working on things that you all believe will benefit your company. So in terms of running a program like this, I'd always recommend that you'd set in this, for instance, if you started December, you'd have December, January, February, March, April, May. Of course, I bring back Phil and say, give everybody June, July, and August off, because they're much more interested in going down the park, going down the pub, and actually having a nice summer. And then you can click and restart September, October, November. So that's it. That's my pitch for a 5-step plan for kickstarting innovation. I will pass for any questions, or if you have any ideas or thoughts, please talk to me. I've also I will happily share a copy of this. I'll send it to Ben. And if there's any suggestions, thoughts, or something you want to contribute, because this is an ongoing process, I'm working it up into some kind of pamphlet or book, but I'm some way away from that because I want to have I want to have some working successful models before I do that. Thank you very much for listening. And I will stop sharing and pass back to Ben.
Well, thanks very much, Aaron. That's really, really good. I've certainly enjoyed it, and yeah, very, very insightful stuff. Yeah, I think should we jump straight into the questions, if that's okay? I think we've got quite a few. I've asked a couple myself. I think we've got 5 or 6. So yeah, first one from Hame was, how do you find the balance between making the brilliant product and the agile approach, where you start with a fairly basic MVP and then improve upon it?
So ultimately for me, my own mantra about make things brilliant is about creating the environment, because I think that ultimately within your workspace, the important thing is to make sure that because I come from a product background, and because product sits at the intersection, for me, that's actually about making sure that collaboration is working. I will be honest, I don't think that many companies collaborate well. And I'm going to say that I think the reason for that is I find when I talk to people kind of think they collaborate automatically. They don't, they really don't. So I think it has to be learned. And it's quite hard work, and it does mean that you have to invite people and listen to them. I probably didn't answer your question, but I think in terms of everything I do starts with an MVP. So in this case, in terms of kickstarting innovation, you are starting with MVPs. Nothing here should be much more than that to start with. You know, if someone has a big pitch for an idea that is too big, then that's something that, you know, the C-level, when it's presented, kind of go, we need to have more conversations about this. This is complex. This could mean a change in direction. I worked with a startup recently who decided to do something new, and I sat them down after 2 consulting periods of going through this, and I kind of said, okay, before I do any more work with you on this, do you realize that this might change your entire business? Because if this product that you've decided to kind of add on is successful, it will take over and you will have to dump what you do, because they weren't natural extensions of each other. So ultimately, yes, I do believe everything starts with an MVP, but I think there's a whole other subject that could be a really good discussion for a panel to say, what is an MVP? Because I will tell you, put 3 different rooms with 6 people and you'll come out with 3 completely different things about what it is. So I think that's another good topic for discussion.
Cool, good stuff. I hope that answers the question, Jaime.
If it doesn't, ask another one.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron.
Hey.
Cool. And then another one from Jaime. Do you want to ask yourself, or do you want to read it out, Jaime?
Yeah, it was more around on the 5-step plan. The 5th step is about involving everyone, or at least it alluded to involving everyone at the outset. Yeah. Now, in my company, the biggest challenge that we have is some projects, everyone wants to be involved, and they have like really nice ideas, but sometimes it drags the project forever.
Yes.
So at what point you say, now this is scoped out, now let's move to actually development or the next phase until we have something that we can present back to you?
I think in one of those things, depending on the companies, I mean, as a group of people sitting here, we'll all know that we've worked in different places with different personalities. And sometimes there will be personalities in there too, which I will put in my most diplomatic sense of, who are somewhat challenging. And ultimately, I find that quite often one of the ways to kind of handle those is to start at the outset to say that we need to reach it's often to combine 2 things, which to say, in order to get this moving, we have this amount of time. So we need to reach a decision to move forward. And it's fine to say, if it slips, then what will be the, that's where your project management hat has to change for the product manager to actually realize that part of the thing here is also managing people and managing stakeholders. And I find, and I'm not going to say I've ever perfectly managed stakeholders, but really the best way to do that is to actually start to either involve a program manager or project manager, or if you've been one, put that hat on and start to make them understand the timing and what will impact and why we need to move forward on certain things. I hope that helps, but that's the only kind of logical advice I can give. When I worked in the US, I had one person who always threw bombs in things that had been done. And in the end, actually, a very, very wise head of program management said to me, "You don't keep him busy enough." And so I actually found a fantastic way to divert attention was to ask for their expertise to help me do certain things. And it was a very good distraction technique because it worked. So there's a hint.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, nice one. I've got a couple of questions. I'll just redo one of mine and then we'll go to Leonardo. So yeah, my one was just, I think you stressed a couple of times, really important to have sort of the C-suite, C-level support on this. I mean, I imagine in lots of sort of traditional companies where they, it can be difficult to get that support. So is there another alternative, or is that really, really essential?
The really important point here is that the CEO is the person who needs to buy into it, because if the CEO buys into it, ultimately you have to either have whatever your head product function is in the company, one, they have to be probably the ambassador for the program, but the CEO needs to buy into it. And a good way of doing that is, and actually, again, if this is something that's useful, because I obviously have told you this is in early stages in some forms, but actually I think it would be quite useful in early stages not only to have those Google products to show it's that element of saying, here are products that have been developed because of companies who've actually invested in these ideas. And I think it's about showing, talking about what value can come back from it. So the CEO has to buy into it, or you will not get, you just won't get where you need to be. Because ultimately, I've watched in the last 2 big companies that I've been where, I don't know, there's just a slightly patronizing, they're off doing their little thing today. And I'm kind of like, that's a bit of a worry, because hack days and hackathons very frequently are looked upon as, a bit like getting the masseur in once a week for the team. That's really not what this is about. And so I think selling this in as a way to actually make sure that everybody in our company has ideas is the important bit. So I will happily work on good examples of that, because in terms of turning it into a book, I think quite often you're right asking that question. I think it's important for people to understand good examples of why this is important.
Cool. Yeah, thanks very much for that. I think, Leonardo, you had a question. Do you want to ask yourself, or do you want me to read it out?
Yeah, I can. Hi, Aaron. Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Yeah, my question was on how prescriptive you are with this number of sessions. I mean, I understand that you want to align it with the quarters to make it measurable, but I guess some people may need more than session 1 to come up with an idea.
Oh, definitely.
Some other people may be faster in developing.
And I tell you, that's the reason why you need a gang of 4, because I think that that's why you can decide yourself. I do have to say, depending on the size of the company, this can go one of 2 ways. I align them with quarters, not for any real logic, except that I kind of thought through measurable how I've worked through certain hackathons and worked through some professional hackathon groups and how things have worked. So my take on that is 100% up for grabs change. And again, it's something that I think that when I've got 2 or 3 really good examples of making this work, then I'll be able to better suggest. But I do think it is one of those belt tightening and loosening exercises, which is why session 3, step 3 actually has multiple weeks. I think 3 through 8. So one could easily actually build in more time there. I agree with you.
Cool, thanks.
Go on, Ken, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so it's really just, you come up with a great idea, something like Gmail, for example. Should that be incentive enough that you've got the kudos of having the idea, or should there be some sort of financial or otherwise reward for the team that came up with it? And if not, what's to stop them taking that idea elsewhere outside of the company?
So that's the essence of Kaizen, which is ultimately so for me, if I go back to, the reason that I'm putting this forward is very simply that I do believe in my own mantra of make things brilliant. Because actually, if I look at, I can honestly say just about every company I've ever worked with, I've rarely seen the whole workforce engaged at the same level. And I don't think that's completely naive. I've got really close to it a couple of times. And I think that, I'll be honest with you and say that we all know that there are times when our companies buzz and keep us really kind of thrilled. And then you get a lull. That's human life. That's logical. But to your point, the whole idea of this is, I mean, if you look at Google, I can tell you that the people who came up with Gmail were very well rewarded. I mean, if you look this week, I looked at the average Google salary is $250,000. I mean, that's not bad when you think about it. So Google most definitely repays its best people and its people who give ideas. I think apart from anything else, though, Ken, my take on it is, there is that element of being heard and inspired. And I think it also makes you realize, and I'm going to be really blunt here, and I say, there are a couple of places where I put forward ideas like this, and if they're not listened to, it kind of thinks, move on.
Yeah.
So to your point, if people aren't listening to good ideas, I mean, in my most recent place, I did actually have an absolutely, what I think, and again, I do know that some of my ideas might be absolute howlers, but I can say I had a huge idea in my last place of work, and I didn't share it in the end because I didn't think they were big enough to take it.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's how it goes.
I guess that's what happens. People leave companies to sort of, like I say, pursue those ideas. And just one more question.
We should do that.
I did just one more question connected with that. In terms of, I mean, it seems very skewed towards larger companies, corporates that have difficulty servicing these types of ideas, because obviously in a smaller company you've got it's much easier to surface this kind of stuff. But would you see, obviously a lot of large corporates try to bring in startups with ideas and then evaluate those on this kind of basis? Would you see that as a part of this, or would you say?
I'll be honest with you, Ken. I actually think so. For instance, my last couple of places I worked, the Guardian, trying to get innovation moving was very hard work. Even though I think it's a very inspiring, I thought it was a very inspiring place to work, and I absolutely loved, I'll be absolutely blunt, say of all the places I've worked in the last 20 years, it was probably for me one of the most inspiring. It wasn't from our point of view, from a product point of view, because the way ideas were allowed to be shared was not necessarily inspiring or empowering. And I have to say that getting something like this off the ground in a place like that's extraordinarily difficult. If I'd say that I would say that probably companies who are in the 60 to 200 employee range are probably going to benefit from an idea like this the most. But part of the idea that I want to try and promulgate and produce over the next couple of years is, if I can move this idea and this idea of actually really instituting innovation into the DNA, I think bigger companies will realize they have to take it. I mean, I think it's much harder for Google to do this now, but that's why I say I think the important thing about selling in the idea of this is to point out that actually it's not going to involve the whole workforce all the time. It's going to involve the people who have the ideas initially, and then it's going to involve the people who can help turn those ideas into flesh. So yeah, I hope that helped.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks.
Cool, good stuff. I think I've got one more from Tanya. Do you want to come off mute and ask, or do you want me to ask it?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the talk. So we kind of use a similar kind of plan or process like this. We follow the Basecamp shape up method. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's
no, please do share that. I'd be very interested to hear that.
Yeah, definitely. I'll put the link in the chat just after. A big part of the kind of pitch writing or kind of pitch proposing process is kind of sizing the opportunity. Is that something that you kind of do within the 5 steps? Or I guess, how do you do it within those 5 steps that you mentioned?
I think for me, yes, I think that's part of so that is in more detail than I've outlined here. But I agree. I think that understanding the size of the prize, so part of the element for me is also understanding the size of the prize and understanding the reason that one of the reasons I adopt the method of actually having to pitch the idea and attract those different groups, thank you for that link, is that I think one of the other companies that uses a similar idea in its operations is Spotify, which is that, you know, product teams do actually have to go out and pitch ideas in order to get people to work on them. And so it was that and a couple of startups I worked with here in France that inspired the idea for me of actually making sure that you attract a business marketing person to your group, you know, and having those different skills means that actually when you're fleshing out a plan, you do have the figures, you can say what it's worth, because the pitch is a true Dragon's Den pitch. You know, C-levels are not going to take these things on board unless you can tell them what you believe it's worth, what difference it will make or what efficiencies it will bring. Ultimately, I honestly believe, I think, talking to you as a diverse group of people, I've worked with a lot of product teams who don't necessarily have these skills. And so that's why, for me, having a diverse group of people take part means that you will have people who will question whether this is a big enough idea. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I look forward to looking at what you sent me. And I'm delighted. I have obviously come across Basecamp, but a long time ago, and I look forward to looking at that.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, I guess you mentioned kind of raising it or kind of proposing it to the CEO should definitely be part of it. With that in mind, do you think, like, what level of detail do you think is necessary when kind of adding in kind of potential ROI or the potential impact that your idea in your kind of top line business metrics, or kind of granular detail based on the type of pitch that it is?
I would say for me that's a bit I'd like to say, Tanya, that for me is a bit like how long is a piece of string, and it 100% depends on your CEO, because I've worked with those who will kind of go, I like the idea of that, can I read the 56 pages that you prepared? And then there's Dave I worked with, who's head of online at the BBC, be like, if it's more than 10 bullet points, take it out of here. So I think you have to respond completely to whoever you're working with. My rule of thumb in that is always to do both, is to actually have high level plans, but always have the backup done so that you can actually show what are the benefits. And I think the most important thing for me is also in an idea like this is to show how minimal the investment is. Because I think that to experiment with something for a quarter, and I think another reason, going back to Jamie or Jaime, who is that actually one of the reasons for doing something in a quarter is it's a very sellable period to pitch an idea.
Cool, thank you very much.
Not at all, and thank you for the information. That's great. I will inhale that.
Go on, Ken. I think you had another question, didn't you?
Yeah, so I was just going to ask this sort of, well, any size business, but certainly small businesses use tools such as design thinking, business model canvas, that type of thing. That's a great tools to structure a proposition of a business. Do you see those types of things being used, or just a straight pitch?
You know, Ken, I'm a really big believer in people using tools that work for them. Funnily enough, I tried to, when I was at moo.com, I tried to use business model canvas, and with mixed success, but it often depends on who's doing it. I will tell you, my only warning with business model canvas is the two of us who thought that was a great idea ended up having at least 15 hours of our week having to show people how that worked and how they need to do it. So I would be careful about suggesting things because you end up having to show people how. But, you know, at the same time, if you're going to collaborate, it's useful. Yes, I would use any tool. I'm going to tell you very bluntly, I hate Jira. I hate any specific tool that has to be used for anything. I'm a big believer that if you, or as a group, have a set of tools that are working really well for you, use them. But I don't believe, I'm really not a believer in a specific set of tools, because I just find that it depends on the personalities and the level of culture in the company as to whether. I've watched Jira be the best thing on earth, and twice now I've watched it bury groups just because it was very, very poorly implemented.
I guess it's just sort of like creating something that, you know, has got structure, so that, you know, people are not focusing on, you know, the technical nature of an idea. They're looking at the market and
it's a good idea, and actually thank you for that, because what, in a sense, I think you're rightly pointing out is what I don't have is a good canvas of what should that pitch contain. I think it won't be necessarily a one size fits all, but actually it's a good idea, and I should expand on it and think through some more of the detail of that. So thanks.
Sure.
Nice one. I think that's everything covered. So yeah, really, really good stuff. Is there anything more you want to cover, Aaron?
No, I'm just looking. Is there something else? Oh, well, actually, Tanya, you actually already answered what I said. So sorry for repeating myself there. Sizing an opportunity, again, all I would say about sizing an opportunity or a pitch is that's really about making sure that it depends, because for commercial product managers I've worked with, with Premier and etc., that's an easy task. But, I worked with a lot of people there who'd grown up in some of the big corporations where that's just part of the job. If you don't have those, your marketing department will have them, and that's why they're essential to use. And biz dev can always size an opportunity. And I will be honest, it's actually one of the things that I try and send when I join new companies and I look at the skills and the base of the product team. I always send people on understanding how to size opportunities. It's not easy, and it's something we do all have to learn. So, if you don't, it's one of those great courses to put yourself on. I find it's quite inspiring.
Sorry, which course was that?
Basically any courses on financial modeling. There are a number on LinkedIn Learning, but I'm just saying it's one thing that a lot of product departments don't necessarily encourage their people to do. But luckily, I was lucky enough when I was at Mood to work with the chief revenue officer there, who is either ex-Procter & Gamble or Unilever. And she basically said to me, she said, honey, if I had shown the business plan you just showed at Unilever, I'd have been out my ass by the end of the week. So she basically said, you need to kind of understand how to do this. And actually, because she was actually quite a fun mentor, I learned very quickly because that was not my skill. And so since then, I proposed certain courses for people to do. If you're working in certain arenas, you have to understand this. And so LinkedIn Learning has quite a number of good courses on that.
Very good accent, that, Aaron. Well done.
Yeah, I hope that wasn't. Yeah, my other half keeps telling me after things like that, yeah, we're sending you on diversity training.
Cool. Nice one. Well, yeah, I think let's wrap things up. I think that was a really good session. So thanks very much again, Aaron. Really, really good, and thanks for all your time and effort sort of putting into that. I think it's been a really nice. Although it's been input, it's been a nice little chat between just a small group. Sometimes it's nice just having those small ones as well. So yeah, good stuff. Thanks everyone for attending. Don't forget to sort of check out the other events. I think we've got another one tomorrow with Stuart, which should be good fun, and then we've got some more later in the week. So yeah, check them out. And of course, yeah, we're always keen to be in touch. So do reach out. If there's anything you need from me, and I'm sure Aaron will be keen to speak to you as well. If there's anything more more questions. I'm
just going to put my email address into the chat. Just feel free to send any thoughts or anything to me. Thanks, everybody. I really enjoyed that, and thanks very much for your questions. It was brilliant.
Yeah, cool. Really good stuff. Well, everyone, have a nice evening. Go and enjoy your dinner, and we'll catch up soon.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.